I'm Sherry Knowles. I'm from Owensville, Indiana. And I grew up in a Christian home. I have two loving Christian parents and two sisters. I grew up in the church. So when I was asked to give my testimony, and I thought about that, I thought, testimonies are about when you first meet Jesus. And that's like asking me when I first met my parents. My parents have always been there, and Jesus has always been in my life also. I was brought to church as an infant. Throughout my childhood, I've always been in church. I taught Sunday school classes as a teenager. I went to college and I was involved in all the Christian organizations, and I went to chapel and church, so he's always been a part of my life. But when I was 12 years old, I decided to make the commitment to God himself and be baptized. So I was baptized at that time, and not because that's what you do when you grow up in a Christian home, but because I had a true understanding of who Jesus was and what he did for my life. And I remember having a very distinct conversation with God at that time. And I basically told him that, listen, I know I'm going to screw up. I know I'm not going to get this right, and you know I'm not going to get this right, but I'm going to promise you these two things. As a 12-year-old child, I can be intentional in honoring my mother and father. So I will obey their rules. I will make sure that my actions bring them honor. Now, I wasn't always perfect at it, but I was intentional at it. The second thing that I promised him was that I understand that my heart and my body are used to glorify you. So I will make sure that I'm intentional in the positions I put myself in. I won't go to the party where I know I may be tempted and be led away from God's path that he had for me. And I remember growing up, going through high school and college, that these things were always in the forefront of my mind. Again, I'm not always perfect at those things, but I was intentional in those. So in order to get to the complete end of my testimony, I have to fast forward my life about 12 years. And the next part of my story is what permanently and forever solidified my foundation in Jesus Christ. In September of 1998, my younger sister and her husband were expecting twin girls. They were born about 4 weeks early, but they were beautiful and perfect. At the time, I was single. I had my own house. We lived just a few blocks apart. So I became the surrogate mom. On my days off, I would go over and help take care of them. I worked the night shift, so it was convenient that on my night times, I could spend the entire night with them all by myself. And it was good because it let my sister and brother-in-law take a good night's rest. So it was a win-win situation for everyone. Around Christmas time, one of her daughters, Taylor, was just becoming fussy. She wasn't feeling well. She could only be consoled wrapped up in a blanket in her mom's arms. So shortly after Christmas, they took her to the doctor. They found out that she had a hole in her heart that would need to be immediately repaired. So I got the call to come pick up her older sister, Jordan, and I became Jordan's mom for the duration of Taylor's hospital stay. She was transferred to Riley's Children's Hospital, where they did open heart surgery. And they didn't find one, but two holes in her heart that were able to be repaired. And they also found that she had a heart valve that was leaking. That would have to wait because she was too little and there was no heart valve small enough. So this happened over the course of about 4 weeks, where she had her open heart surgery. I would take Jordan up to Indianapolis on my days off so that she could spend time with her mom and dad. So they would go over to the Ronald McDonald House and have some family time together. And during those times, I would stay at the hospital with Taylor. So I was there when she went into respiratory distress because she had pulmonary hypertension. And I watched the room fill with doctors and nurses immediately to stabilize her, while I stood back in the corner and I prayed. And they were able to stabilize her. I was also there when the respiratory therapist attempted to take her off her ventilator and had to immediately intubate her again because she was struggling too hard to breathe. And I stood in the corner and I prayed. She had so many people praying for her all over this country. We were praying for strength, for complete healing. And each day she got stronger and a little bit better. She was finally able to be taken off of her ventilator. She got her smile back. We were able to hold her even among all the machines and equipment she was hooked up on, but we were able to hold her and touch her again, and she was getting better. Before she could go home, she had to have a permanent pacemaker placed in her heart. The doctors suspected that due to the invasiveness of her open heart surgery, they had probably permanently obstructed the electrical pathways of her heart, and she would have to have a pacemaker for the rest of her life. She was 5 months old at the time. But we were okay with that. She was going to get to come home. So after her pacemaker was implanted, they waited a few days, and she was doing well, and she was coming home, and all of our prayers were answered. We were getting used to our new life, taking care of not only twins, but one who has a serious medical condition, but she was doing well. About a week after being home, Taylor started to just not feel well again. My sister just had a feeling that something was wrong. So she took her back to the doctor, and they checked her out head to toe. Heart was working good, lungs were clear, and she was just starting to get a cold. So not a big deal. Normal protocol for babies. Keep her lots of fluids, keep a humidifier going, and send her home. So that's what they did. This happened for about a week with visits to the doctor about every day. Each time the same prognosis. She just has a cold. Just wait it out 7 to 10 days and she'll be all better. On February the 13th, on their way back home from another doctor visit, Taylor started turning blue. They immediately turned around and headed straight to the ER, where they waited for her local cardiologist to meet them. She was admitted into the hospital that night, where they ran additional tests, and her local cardiologist got in contact with the Riley cardiologist, and they were devising a plan of what to do. As tests came back, they decided that she needed to be transferred back to Riley Hospital, and they were going to send the ambulance to come get her. At that time, we sent my brother-in-law ahead so that he could meet the ambulance there at Riley so she wouldn't be alone, and my sister and I stayed back in Evansville to wait. About an hour later, they decided that they were sending Life Flight. They couldn't wait on the ambulance. So they sent Life Flight to Evansville, and my sister and I waited for them to come and pick her up. It was getting late into the evening when they got there and got her all settled in, and we said our goodbyes. It was later that we would find out that moments after they took off, her heart stopped. They worked on her all the way to Indianapolis, trying to revive her. And if I remember correctly, about 40 minutes after they got to the hospital, they were unsuccessful. And on February 14th of 1999, Taylor June Schneider was pronounced dead. She's 5.5 months old. This event forever changed my life, but it's the events that followed that forever changed my relationship with Jesus Christ. A few days after Taylor's funeral, some friends of my sister and her husband's came to visit, thinking they would bring some comfort. They had a 3-year-old daughter at the time who had a dream the night before that they wanted to share. This 3-year-old girl started to explain very vividly what she had seen. She had saw Taylor happy and healthy with Jesus. And they thought, well, that's such a nice story, isn't it? And as she's explaining what's happening, her parents say, yes, Taylor's in heaven with Jesus. Kind of like how you would talk to a young child. And this 3-year-old was very, very adamant. She's not in heaven, but she's with Jesus. And as she's telling the story very vividly, my sister stops and she says, do you guys understand what she's telling us? And her mom and dad said, yeah, she's telling us about that Taylor's with heaven. Isn't this nice that God gave us this sign? And my sister said, no, she's not. And she pointed them to the references in the Bible. The Bible talks about many different levels of heaven, and even talks about when Jesus was on the cross being crucified, that he spoke to one of the men being crucified with him, who had the understanding that Jesus himself did not deserve to be there, but that this man did because of the sin and the wrong that he'd done in his life. And he was having this conversation with Jesus, and at that moment, Jesus forgave him and told him that because of that, he would see him that day in paradise together. So I take this and understand to mean that we have this interim. You know, we teach little children that people die and they go to heaven because that's a good, simple foundation for young children to understand. But when you go into your Bible, my understanding is that there's really this interim between earth and heaven, because God is preparing, Jesus is preparing heaven for us. And when that day comes, it's his second coming. And he's going to come and gather all of us, those who have already died and believing in him, and those that are left here on this earth. So it's this interim that Jesus was talking to this man that was being crucified with him about, that they were going to be there together. This is exactly what this 3-year-old child was describing that she saw in this dream she had the night before. So what this friend was calling to bring comfort to my sister and our family about a simple dream turned into so much more. It was so biblically based. And her parents, they were new to Christianity and following the faith, and they had the very simple level understanding also, not this deeper level. So my sister was able to share that with them and bring them to that understanding. So there is not a 3-year-old child that I believe would have that understanding without God's intervention. So that brought me great comfort. So while the next year was the hardest year of my life, and I think my family can agree it was the hardest year for all of our lives. There was ups and downs, and there was roller coasters, and there was times when I would have very honest, open conversations with God. And if I was mad, I would tell him I was mad. If I had questions, I would ask those questions. But I'd always come back around to, he made it personal. He knew what we were going through at the time and the level of sadness and turmoil we were in, that he reached out and personally spoke to us through a 3-year-old child. And I will never forget that. And as I've grown past that, I often wondered, how many times have I missed God talking to me? And this is the verse that's become like my life verse. It's James chapter 4, verse 8, that says, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And I take that so personally. And when I'm having those struggles and those times when this world is becoming too much for me, I stop and pause. And I make sure, am I drawing near to God so that I can hear him? This is why I choose to be not just a believer in Jesus Christ, but a follower of Jesus Christ. Anyone who would care about me so deeply in the darkest time of my life to speak to me personally, I don't want to miss that ever. So that's the God that I want to draw near to. That's the God that I want to have near to me when this world is consuming me. I want to make sure that I can hear what he's telling me. And when I do, that calms my fears and my doubts go away.